Okay, so welcome to Vue. By the end of this lesson, I hope that you too will be able to render a Vue app. So let's start by talking about why on earth we'd want to do such a thing. Let's try to place Vue in kind of a historical context. So go ahead and shout out some names of front-end frameworks that you've heard of before. Current, former, any of them.
Angular.
Angular. NG was kind of the father of all these. What else?
Ember.
Ember. What else?
I think there's one called React.
Yep. What else?
Was jQuery one of them?
JQ kind of predates all of this. What else?
Hey, I could be wrong here, Kyle. It seems as if maybe you're drawing, but we don't see anything.
Yep, it's because I'm not sharing.
There's a new one, C# front end called Blazor.
Blazor. What else? Vue's the one that we're talking about now. What else? Lots more.
Is there .NET? Is that one?
.NET, I'm going to put, so that would kind of go along with Blazor. I'm going to put .NET like way over here. It's kind of, it's closer to Rails than it is any of these, but it does have a front-end piece to it that Blazor is probably intended to be a replacement for. What else? Other front-end framework kinds of things you've heard before?
Ionic.
Very nice. I'm going to put Ionic kind of in the middle. What else?
Rails have a front-end framework that we skipped over.
Not real. Not in the same way that these are. It's closer to this. And so the part that we skipped over was ERB templates. .NET has a templating system too. They're not quite the same as front-end frameworks. Front-end frameworks were a replacement for those.
I heard about one. I was watching a video called Svelte.
Yeah, Svelte's new. What else? Once upon a time, there was kind of popular one called Knockout. Also around here, there was one called Meteor.
Is Flutter a front end?
I actually don't know well enough to say. I think it's for part of the front end, but I don't know if it's a front end framework.
You seemed pretty excited about Svelte. Is there like something it innovates on specifically that's cool?
That's a good question. So the big thing that Svelte was supposed to give us is better what we call tree shaking. Tree shaking is, let's say I import this huge ass library, but I only use 1/10 of it. Tree shaking is getting rid of the other 90% of it automatically. So it makes your download smaller. And Svelte was kind of designed with that in mind.
I heard about another one called Elm. I don't know if that's...
Elm is, yeah, I'll put that in here.
I heard about one called Phoenix.
Yeah, Phoenix is backend, but I'm way into it. Phoenix is functional Rails, so it's like model view controller, just like Rails is, except one of the things that I find the most unnecessarily confusing about OOP anything is how like the classes are just magically there. You have this hash called params. Why? Where did it come from? Who fucking knows? Just accept that it's there. In the functional version of this, all that stuff gets passed in through a container, but otherwise it looks very similar. I'm way hot on Phoenix. It's also fast as hell. Any other front-end frameworks?
What about the Elixir language?
So Elixir is a language. Elixir is what Phoenix is written in.
Yeah, I never heard about.
Elixir is a Erlang runtime language. We'll talk about those another day. What else?
Cool.
Any other front-end frameworks? Never came across Preact. It's React, except it does even less. As if that were possible. Whole bunch of things in the front-end landscape. And they tend to fall somewhere on a spectrum. We talked about this a little bit at Stand Down yesterday, but opinionated, unopinionated. So our unopinionated stuff, hard to get, much less opinionated than React. Svelte, I'd also put that over here. And unopinionated stuff often tends to fall a little bit closer to the library side of things, where it's code that's solving like a very narrow problem, and it's intended to be combined by you with a lot of other pieces of code. The more opinionated side, you don't get too much more opinionated than Ember. Meteor, Meteor's probably even more so than React. So we have those where there's exactly one right way to do everything. It is just like Rails. If you try to fight the framework, you're going to have a bad time. You go with the framework, you get everything for free. And then right in between all of these, we have Vue. You can write Vue in a fairly opinionated way, in a way that feels very close to Ember, honestly. You can also write it as just a pure component framework, just like React, not use the router, not use the module system, any of that kind of stuff. And it feels very comfortable coming from React. So it's part of what's neat about it. But I think my favorite part is that we can sort of go back and forth between these two things pretty seamlessly. It's really as opinionated as we care for it to be. So that's just a little bit of historical context on where this sits. It's something like 5 years old, 4 years old. It was developed by a guy named Evan Yu, who's a Chinese developer. And one of the other things that's kind of special about it compared to a lot of these other frameworks we talked about are Angular is a Google product and React is a Facebook product. Vue is just an open source project. There really isn't a particularly large corporate thumb on anything. And that gives it a ton of flexibility. Before your time, as in like a year and a half ago or so, there's a big dust up about React and Facebook's licensing terms, where React had a clause in their license that said, oh, and by the way, you can't use React to build anything that competes with Facebook. And everybody went, well, Facebook does everything, so what doesn't compete with Facebook? And then a bunch of people started jumping ship from React, and Facebook went, no, we'll take it out of the license. The lawyers made us put it in. But there are none of those kinds of conflicts with something like Vue. Cool. So that's a little bit of background on this. Before we get hands-on, give me some questions.
Where does Angular sit in all this?
I would put Angular about... I don't know why my pen got big. I'd put NG right about here. So Angular was kind of the first one, and it introduced a concept called two-way data binding that everybody went gaga for. And it was actually probably the thing that put React on the map. Is they kind of mathematically proved what a bad idea two-way data binding is, and replaced it with that one-way data binding that you do, for example, in controlled forms and stuff, where we have the data only flowing one direction and events and like closures and stuff going the other, and handling everything that way. Turns out that's faster by like an order of magnitude. So Angular rewrote, Ember rewrote, everybody refactored the framework to do one-way data binding instead of two. And Ember did that without making any breaking changes. It's the exact same API, it was all just internal. Angular did that by going from Angular 1 to Angular 2, which turned out to be a terrible mistake. Angular 2 is not a like new version of Angular 1. It's a completely different framework. They wrote it from the ground up. It doesn't even reuse very many of the same ideas. They just called it Angular 2. And so that's why you'll often see things like, oh, we're hiring for an Angular 2 Plus developer or a modern Angular developer, because it's a totally different framework, which really fucked the people that invested hard in Angular 1 because there was no upgrade path. You're just migrating to a different framework. There's a lot of people kind of give a middle finger to Google after that and haven't looked back. But once upon a time, that was dominant. You couldn't, it was the React. In the 80-20 of this, 80% of the market was Angular. And really just because of that one decision, that cost them a lot of capital they never really got back. Cool, what else?
Is it true that Facebook in the beginning said that if you use React, whatever you do belongs to Facebook?
No, it wasn't quite that. It was just the competition clause, where
Okay.
you can't use this to do anything that competes with Facebook. But Facebook does everything, and so that ended up being really broad. But they struck that out of the license about 1.5 years ago. What else?
I have a question. When you hear about frameworks and stuff like that,
Mhm.
I get a little mixed up between something like Bootstrap or and something like React. Are those like CSS frameworks? How do those work?
Sure.
Or how are they comparable?
So Bootstrap is a styling framework. So we do this so that you basically don't have to write CSS or write much less CSS. Bootstrap, Zurb Foundation, Material, all of those are examples of like styling frameworks. So let's talk about libraries and frameworks real quick. Who can give me, actually, I want you to think about this to yourself for a sec. What is the difference between a library and a framework? Somebody asks you this in an interview. What are you going to say? Think to yourself for a sec. Difference between a library and a framework. Lily, give it your best shot. You're on mute.
Framework is more like structural.
Mhm.
Like it's structuring the application and the code. I don't know. It's like the structure of the house, and then like a library is more maybe like the contents of the house. I don't know.
That's not bad at all. Brad, is there anything you can add to that?
That's actually I kind of like that analogy. To me, it would be like if I was to keep on with that analogy, like it seems like a framework would be the house itself, where like a library would just be the set of tools and stuff like that, like individual functions and things that you would
Aye.
call. Whereas a framework, the framework like builds whole like folders and files for you and stuff like that.
Yeah. All right. I'm liking this. Both of those are great answers. Adam Shappy, anything that you can add on top of that? You have to unmute if you can. It's not a video either. All right. So those are both great answers. One of those kinds of like heuristics we could use for whether something's a framework or a library is, could you have more than one? Because we can have more than one hammer. You can't have more than one frame for your house. So if we have something like Vue, we don't also have Angular. So that puts them a little bit more in the framework kind of category. Versus something like a library, maybe we're talking something like Lodash. It's a collection of tools. And you could absolutely have Lodash and Ramda, which is another library that does the same kind of thing. Like, it's totally possible to use both of those in one application. That's like having a Makita drill and a DeWalt Brad nailer. Jared, did I get it right? Did I use tool words right, Tool Dad?
You earned your merit badge, sport.
Oh, thank you so much. Another great definition I heard recently of libraries and frameworks is that a framework is bringing a bunch of code together, and a library is splitting code apart. So awesome. Vue is definitely in the framework kind of category. And shoot, anything else you want to talk about before we get our hands dirty? All right, so let's I want everybody to install the Vue CLI tool. So you're going to do npm install -g @vue/CLI, just like this. It's going to take a while to run. npm install -g @vue/CLI.
So the -g is global, right? So it doesn't
Correct.
matter which directory we do this in?
You got it, baby.
Okay, thanks.
npm install -g @vue/CLI.
While that's loading, I have a slightly unrelated question, but it's kind of related. How much do you have to worry about like these depreciated things, these lines that keep coming up? Because I see those warnings all the time.
Sure. So let's get the vocab right on this. So it's deprecated. It means a slightly different thing than depreciated. Who can tell me what something being deprecated means?
It's out of date.
Yep.
It's no longer being updated or maintained.
Yep. Also, it currently works. We don't guarantee when it's not going to work anymore. So before you yank something out of a language or a library or a framework, you deprecate it. And you throw deprecation warnings anytime you see it being used. It's like, yo, this like totally works right now, but one of these days it's not going to, and you should be aware of that. You should make your plans to move to something else. So Brad, your question, how worried should you be about this? Not very, because really those warnings are more for the people who are putting together this package. And so they'll see that and go, oh shit, we need to take core.js request and mkdirp out of @vue CLI. Sometimes this will get reported as a GitHub issue, or they'll just see this. But oftentimes the deprecation warning comes with instructions on how to fix it like this. And so you could totally do that as like an open source contribution. Just ask Jeremiah about that tomorrow. Okay, so we have Vue CLI installed. This is the equivalent of like a create React app kind of thing. So to use it, you're going to do Vue create, and what's the app we're building? Somebody give me a noun.
Coronavirus.
Cool. So we're going to call this the Rona. View create the dash Rona. And this is going to be a little bit different. You should follow along with this. So when we run this, it's going to ask us to make some choices. And what we want to do is manually select features. And this lets us kind of customize how this gets built. So in this menu, it's kind of like a flashback to CLI apps from Mod 1. You press up and down and spacebar to turn these options on and off. We want to keep Babel. We're going to add router. We're going to add Vuex. We're going to add CSS preprocessors. And hell, let's throw testing in there also. Keep the linter and formatter also. So really everything but TypeScript and PWA support. And then it's going to go, neat. Do you want to use history mode for router? And if you look at this like Y/N, the one that's in capital is the one that'll happen if you just hit enter. So yes is the default on that. That works for us.
Quick question, do I do lint on save or lint and fix on commit?
We'll get there. So which SAS preprocessor do you want, or which style preprocessor do you want to use? We have two different versions of SAS. Less is a competitor to SAS. Stylus is a competitor to SAS. Default is fine with us on this one also. Which linter do we want to use? Default is fine on this one as well. And then Jared's question, do we want to lint on save or lint on fix and commit? Lint and fix on commit. How about we lint on save? So we can just do defaults on that one. For a unit testing solution, why not Jest? And then for end-to-end testing solution, oh, you know how much I love Cypress. And then do I want to put the different configuration for all these tools that I just added in their own files or in package.json? How about package.json? And it goes, do I want to save this as a preset? Nah, I like picking it every time. And so when I do this, it's going to install and configure all of that shit together. That's pretty cool. We really don't have like a decent equivalent for that in React.
I just got hit with, after that last step, pick the package manager, use Yarn or use NPM.
So if you got asked that question, I would probably go NPM.
All right, cool.
Is it possible you could like recap the things you picked so I could put those in my notes? I know it's kind of hard to go back when it's not sitting there, but what are like the options and what did you pick?
So we wanted everything except, and this is going to be different on every project, and it's not a big deal if you get these wrong or change your mind later or anything like that. But we wanted everything but PWA and TypeScript support. And then we largely went with defaults on everything. But we did use Jest as our unit testing solution, and we used, there's some other one that was slightly different. But if you just went defaults all the way down, like you have a perfectly acceptable setup for your app. It's hard to make any mistakes in here.
Gotcha, thank you.
What's the difference between Dart SAS and Node SAS?
Dart SAS is faster. Node SAS is older, probably works on more systems. All right, so once we've done this, we can CD into the Rona. And if you npm run serve, you should see your very own Vue app show up. $80.80, don't mind if I do. And hey, there's a Vue app. That command was npm run serve. Pretty cool. Anybody have any trouble getting to this point?
I'll just say this: Vue didn't install on my machine. Said the OS rejected it, so I don't mind too much. I'm just watching at this point.
Okay, cool. Let's troubleshoot that later.
Mobile app is still installing.
All right, fair enough. Give it a sec. Give people a chance to get caught up. Much like React, we get things like hot reloading for free. So if I npm run serve over here, and I got that working. If I start changing some stuff around, like in this app.view, maybe it says welcome to your Vue.js app. I changed it.
Here as well.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed they both have Babel. What is Babel?
So Babel is a tool for taking the JavaScript that you write and making it work for the browser. For example, not every browser supports every feature in JavaScript. Even things like .map, those were added. So what Babel does is you write your JavaScript however you want, using the most modern features, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you say, what are the target browsers that I want to support? And Babel will take the JavaScript that you write and make sure that it works for whatever the target browsers are. And sometimes that means totally rewriting it, because everything that, like the destructuring, any of those kinds of syntaxy things, even classes, a lot of that stuff you can do more manually. And so if needed, Babel will rewrite your code to be more manual so that it works on more kinds of things. Good question.
So does that mean you could probably use like more complicated libraries and things that browsers wouldn't know? What was that one?
So Cheesy wants to know, can we clean this up and remove the unnecessary stuff like we do React first thing? Of course we can. So if you wanted to clean up your Vue apps, you're just sort of starting from scratch. An admirable goal. Here are the things that I get rid of. I'll go slow. Over in the source assets folder, I get rid of that logo. Over in the components folder, I get rid of the component in there. Over in the router folder, I don't get rid of it, but I delete everything in this routes array so that all you have for routes is an empty array, and then we get rid of this home view that we're importing. So it should look like that. And then the store is fine. For views, we get rid of both of these views. And then in app.view, we get